Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to a new edition of the webinar series that we organize here at the EU Disinfo Lab every Thursday. We will give just a few seconds for people to join, and I guess that while we do that, I can briefly introduce who we are. EU Disinfo Lab is a non-profit organization gathering knowledge and expertise on disinformation in Europe and beyond. One of the main reasons we organize these webinars, and we've now running them for, I think, over 2 years, is to give a platform to experts in our community to share knowledge and to raise awareness about the excellent work being done across the field. In fact, just a few months ago, we organized, in the last 4 months, we have organized a significant number of webinars, and we even launched a new and we think very timely series that it's called Evidence and Enforcement. It's a series that switched the focus from rules to results. We are now looking at evidence gathered by researchers, by civil society, and how this fits into enforcement action. So before we move on, a quick announcement. The program for our annual next conference, Disinfo 2026 in Vilnius, will start being published gradually at the beginning of May, and the registrations will open around the same time, so stay tuned for that. Let me please now introduce myself. My name is Ana Romero. I am Community Coordinator at EU Disinfo Lab and a Counter Disinformation Specialist. I'll be your moderator today. We have almost 1 hour ahead of us to explore a very fascinating and I would say quite unconventional angle of information investigations within the field of OSINT, a topic that is always among the most in demand in this webinar series. The title of today's webinar is Decoding Russian Intelligence, What Medals and Insignia Reveal. And before we begin, just a few quick technical notes. So this webinar is being recorded, and we are not going to use the Zoom chat for questions. We will be interacting through Slido. You can access Slido from now, as I will be launching a couple of questions in a few seconds, by scanning the QR code that you see on the screen or by going to slido.com and enter the code disinfo. Just to let you know that the Slido will be open throughout all the sessions, so you can really submit your questions and comments at any time. So with that, let me please know, where are you joining us from today? There you go. We have 66 people in the room, so I'm sure that okay, so people from Portugal, from Vilnius, see you in October. Brazil, Paris, from Argentina, hello. Okay, thank you everyone for being here. This is a large community of people joining us today. And let's move to the next question. Which sector do you represent? Okay, significant number of people coming from NGO, civil society, from corporate, academia. Thank you again for being here. Let's now turn to today's topic. As I said before, today we are looking at a very specific and quite unexpected approach to investigations. So I'd say that, correct me, Hervé, if I'm wrong, instead of analyzing content of narratives, these sessions will explore how visual elements like military medals, insignia, can reveal how Russian intelligence units are structured and how information operations are organized behind the scenes. To me, it's a great example of how open source intelligence can go beyond text and database and dataset, using visual clues that might otherwise go unnoticed. And to talk us through this approach in practice, I'm very pleased to welcome our speaker today, Hervé Letoqueux. He's the CEO of CheckFirst and former head of operations at Millennium. His work focuses on detecting and analyzing information manipulation and hybrid threats across Europe. Hervé, thank you very much for being with us today. You're a friend of Using Lab, and now the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and I'm very happy to be here with you today and to present you this investigation. What I will try to do during this 30 minutes is to mix the presentation that I've prepared, of course, and to give a look back at what we've done so far on file heuristic, but also to try to give you some hints via some web browsing. So you'll see me coming from a window, another one. So yeah, thank you so much for this introduction. The idea of today is to try to decode Russian intelligence with medal and insignia and try to have this sort of case study. And maybe as a little introduction, I would say that OSINT is probably dead. And this is a way, this kind of investigation is really a way for us at CheckFirst, and personally to me, to struggle against my own depression. I've been in the OSINT field for the last 15 years or 12 years, approximately 12, 15 years. And very good friends of mine, very skilled, often say to me, well, you know, Hervé, OSINT is dead. And it's probably a bit true. OSINT is probably dead, or at least a little bit. And I would say that OSINT is probably quite tired, I think. We've seen the golden age of web scraping behind us. The platforms and the website nowadays try to make several obstacles to stop us from scraping the data and gathering the data. AI, of course, is a huge problem. Now it's quite difficult to make the difference between truth or false. That's a cliche, but that's also very true in a certain way. And we've seen plenty of OSINT experts on YouTube investigating blurry screenshots and explaining us the new pivot they found, a pivot that was probably 5 years old. So this is kind of a very strange era for OSINT after these years of success, etc. And also platforms. I'm a good friend of platforms. They are shutting down a lot of tools. We've seen X, for example, killing their API. We've seen Meta strangling CrowdTangle. Telegram is now more and more filtered. So it's a quite difficult environment. And we have to struggle every day, maybe like boomers, probably like boomers, and I'm one of them in a certain way, with this strange impression that everything has already been done. Every investigation has already been done. So that's quite difficult to stimulate ourselves to begin new investigation and to find a new path. So I love to start this kind of presentation with a sort of depressed slide and depressed introduction. But it's a bit of the reality, and I'm sure that maybe there is a little voice in you that tell you that every day. So how can we struggle against our own depression? Well, just by remembering that OSINT is first and foremost a mindset, and this is something that it's like a mantra that we should tell us every day. So when you have such a mantra, why can't we just take a step aside? There is a French saying that almost says something like, it's when you're against the wall that you see the world best. So what can we do to do that? And this is why we've been working on this investigation for a long time now. And I say we, CheckFirst and some analysts, and I want to credit them now. Of course, they want to remain a bit discreet. You understand perfectly why, because the topic that they've been investigated is quite sensitive, let's say it like this. And we've investigated some military units on 2 reports. The first one was the FSB 16 Center, which is a unit, a center inherited from the KGB signals intelligence capacities. And we know, because it's been documented in open source, that this 16th center is behind some of Russia's most sophisticated cyber operation, like the Turla intrusion set or the energetic bear. Turla has been on stage for at least the last 22 years, but it's probably older than that. And energetic bear is what we call an APT, Advanced Persistent Threat, in the cyber ecosystem that has been targeting regularly all the energetic field and companies and infrastructure for the last the last years. So we investigated them using these medals and insignias that represent this unit. What we found in this first report that was issued in July last year was, first of all, how to collect this kind of insignias and to attribute them to the 16th center. We found out at least 10 departments within the 16th center with at least 560 employees, and this also only based on OSINT. And more than this, we also geolocated at least 10 SIGINT stations composing the ground-based network of this unit. So this was quite interesting. And 6 months later, it was in January, we came back with another investigation.
Hervé, sorry to interrupt you. In case you are sharing your slides, we cannot see them.
Oh, sorry.
I was waiting because at the beginning you were sharing your thoughts, and now.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Thank you very much. Yeah, perfect. Now, maybe you can make them. Okay.
Thank you.
Maybe you can put them in slide mode.
No, if you don't mind, I really.
Oh, it's okay because you want to switch. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So we came back in January with another investigation on another military unit, the Information Operation Troops, we call them VIO, pertaining to the GRU, another Russian intelligence unit or entity. So it was interesting to do that, and we did this investigation using exactly the same technique that I will detail later. So we came back with at least 118 photos of different emblemas or medals. We identified 15 different units and at least 3 departments. Departments meaning 3 field of activities of this unit. So it was very interesting to document that and to publish this kind of report. How did we do that? And it was also, I talk about the step aside in the introduction. It was also a way to think about the investigation in a different way. So we used the phalaristic, which is a word that I didn't know before starting this investigation several months ago. And phalaristic is the academic study of medals and military decoration. We thought that it was a very good angle to start the investigation. So what we did was basically a preliminary, sorry for my English, screening of what these medals could be in the background. So the first thing that we did was to identify the main online platforms where these Russian military insignias were shared, sold, and discussed. We went we looked for manufacturers' websites, resale platforms, specialized forums run by phalaristic enthusiasts and veterans. So this was the first step, and I can show you some of these websites that we investigated. This is, for example, the kind of manufacturer for the medals. So these webpages are archived. This one is called Breguet in Russian, which is a company that has a long history of fabricating medal. I want to say at this moment that Russia in general has a long history and a strong history of delivering this kind of medal. There is this joke coming from the 70s, and we gave this joke in the report that went saying something like, did you hear Brezhnev had a chest expansion surgery? It was to make room for more medals. So Russia has always had a long history of fabricating medals. So even though the Soviet period has expired, we know that they still continue to manufacture these kind of medals. And these medals are really interesting also for collectors because you play on something like the ego and the interest of it. Some other web page like this that you can find on the internet, Spexnac. Some of this has the second-hand market. It's like vinted for medals. And as you can see, the price is not very expensive. So you can, as soon as you have identified certain medals, you can buy them and make them arrive in your country without too many difficulties. We also identified some phalleristic forums where people exchange their point of view, their medals, photography of their rare medals that they have or they found on markets, etc. So there is an entire ecosystem of selling and exchanging this kind of medal available on the internet. So this was our first angle in order to do that. Then, of course, we had to collect the medals and to try to investigate them just as pictures. So we had to collect and archive the images referencing the studied unit. We had to examine acronyms, unit numbers, symbolic imagery, and I will just make a short emphasis on this. Symbology for military unit has always been a clue. They use different symbols to illustrate their capacity and their mission. For example, the Greek letter C is referred to psychological operation, which is related to information landscape and how to manipulate the information landscape. The GRU itself has its own symbology, and we have the tree grenade. I will maybe detail that later on some of these insignias. We saw the loudspeakers, which is also referred to the information landscape, how to change or manipulate the opinion in a military zone. The bat also is very famous. It's a long-standing symbol, an old symbol for a military unit, very operative unit that use the bat. The diamond, for example, the diamond often refers to a computer, electronic warfare, for example. The keys, the broken keys, of course, quite obvious how to break the code. So all these images, all this symbolic imagery is very present on this kind of medal and allow you to retrieve the activity, the potential activity of this unit. Of course, it's not just the information itself, you have to cross-reference that, but at least it's a very good clue of the activity of the unit. Based on this, we also mapped the bases that we found. I will show you some cool elements that we geolocated, but you can also refer to dates. They are very secretive units that you don't really know of. But some days there is a medal, a commemorative medal that is issued for the 10th anniversary of the unit. And most often there is the date. So you have probably 2016 and 2006. So you start to imagine the fact that maybe this unit was created in 2006. So you see this kind of pivot that you can do on it. So of course, by gathering all this data, we had to manage and structure this growing data set because of course we gathered once again a lot of data. But the cool thing about it is that this data is not personal data, so we didn't have to care about the GDPR at this time. So it was very cool to investigate that and to gather this kind of information. So in order to sum up, I would say that for the methodology, we use some kind of business approach, the supply chain approach, where the medal was the product in itself, and we identified the global supply chain for this metal, the raw material, where it comes from, the producer, the retailer, the second-hand market, the collectors, of course, and we just had to had the clientele in the loop, and I will explain what is the clientele right after. So this is the basic approach and methodology that we use on, once again, a sort of new field of investigation in order for us to document this military unit. Why did we use that? For several reasons. A military insignia is quite difficult to counterfeit. It's not like a patch or something like that, which is, or broderie, that is quite difficult to produce. You have the metal, it costs a little bit of money, and it's quite difficult to counterfeit because of the production cost and the very specific piece of decoration that it is. it was also a good entry point for the investigation because they can be found on several websites, as I previously shown you. And they can be authenticated thanks to their riverside. And they're also identified because of the forum of specialists that really points quite quickly if it's a fake or not. So a lot of people are doing our job of investigation. So you can also cross-check and cross-reference what you found on this website by using their own skills. So it's quite funny. It was also funny to use Firestic for all the social engineering that is behind, sneaking into disinformation actors' psychology to study their use of symbols. I already talked about the symbols, but that's very important. And it's based on one or two key things: the necessity for the army to reward the soldiers, to encourage the recruitment, for example. So they have this sort of necessity to build medal. It's also related to ego of soldiers, simple soldiers or high commanders, because they are proud of what they do, and they want to show what they've done in a certain way, in a very covert way, but they want to explain something. And of course, it's also the ego of the enthusiast, because when a collector, for example, finds a symbol, he's very proud to show it on a forum and say, oh, look what I've found. So it's also very good for our business. It helps us a lot to discover new medals and new things. So as you see, finding this kind of angle and new method investigation is really important, because very few people had done this before, and it was new. It was stimulating to do that. We used some tools, and we didn't build. And this also was very important. We wanted to show via this investigation that we don't need necessarily big tools, big databases, big AI things to do that. Of course, with AI, we can do better things, but we wanted to show a basic investigation that was easily reproducible by many people. So for example, we use this tool Digicam, which is like a classifier for pictures. It's an open source photo management software. So every time we had a new insignias, we stored it in a database, classified by department, unit, etc. We could also enhance a little bit the picture with it. We could add meta tags, for example, like the symbolic themes, the symbols that are on it. We could put in the meta tag the units. It's very easy for us to retrieve the data once you have done this kind of classification. And once again, it's a free tool. It has also a very good capacity of adding geographical tags, so you can even display in this tool the geographical position of the unit. So it's a good way, a central point to work. And once again, it's free, it's open source, very usable. Of course, I have to admit that if we had to redo this investigation, we would probably invest in a better tool, notably with AI to be able, for example, to dedouble or some of the insignias that we have, but it was still very good and very efficient to use. Once you gather the data, once you have your explanation of the symbol and you have collected everything that you need, of course, an investigation doesn't rely on just one information. So you have to enhance your own database with some new information. I already talked about the geolocation, of course. Important to geolocate the insignias. I want to show you, for example, a little example of what we've done on this. If we talk about this investigation precisely, and we go, I'm sorry for the rapid movement on that, but for example, if we go on this report, this kind of map, for example, was really important for us to illustrate, not because it's a beautiful map, very simple, but also very clear, but also because the position of these units, it's always a story. It tells you what this unit is probably trying to spy in a certain way. So the position, the global position of this unit is important. But you can go deeper in this investigation. For example, if we talk about this unit 03110, and we look at this symbol on the right, for example, and I'm going to zoom for all of you, You see these three mountains, for example, in the background. It's something that is recurring on these medals. So this is a good entry point to geolocate the image. It imitates the area of search. And look at these antennas and what we call in French radome, which is the ball inside. You see the antenna and the bubble. And this is typically the kind of thing that you can cross-check just by looking at Google Earth, for example. And you can see these famous globes here. And if you expand the picture, you would see the mountain in the background. So this is typically the kind of thing that the people who produce that or order this kind of medal make appear on the medal and helps you to investigate in the background. So it's traditional OSINT, no specific thing. You just have to have the idea. Of course, we crossed that with some commercial database, not very expensive, but it was also interesting to do that. I will not detail this in this presentation, so please refer to the report. And also, this was very important for us to cross-check the data and cross-validate the data by using online forums where Russian soldiers' mothers, wives, relatives, siblings talk about the units and the 16th century and the VIO. Because sometimes these units are in operation and they are worried, they exchange information. So it was also super interesting to map the medals, to map the area and to cross-check with these kind of forum. Very often the soldiers are more or less quite discreet, let's say it like this, and they don't have access to internet, for example, or social media most of the time on the operational field. But if you investigate the siblings, the mothers and wives, you learn a lot of things just by doing this. Classical pivot, but once again, it's what we do in OSINT. Once again, another example. This for example, is a unit that we found is in the, let's say, close suburbs of Moscow, just by identifying here the symbol of Moscow, the Kremlin plus the flag, but also the parabolic antennas. The number is really important. So we could geolocate this place in a park close to Moscow, concealed within a very dense forest in the heart of Moscow. So it may seem nothing, but it's still very interesting and relevant to have this kind of information in your database and to know that in these suburbs there is this unit. Sorry for the manual zoom and de-zoom. I'm not very familiar with this software on my computer. We also found some different things, like, for example, the encryption and cryptanalysis department. I already talked about the broken keys. I already talked about the diamonds. But these are the symbols that are really used by the GRU. And what was interesting, and this leads me to why we do that in a certain way, why we do that. We also do that to have a sort of impact in the background. And for example, when you see after the publication of our report, GNIDA project, for example, talking about it and showing some pictures of these medals, well, that's a match, and that's fantastic because Alexander Starunsky, wearing the Information Operation Troops patch in late 2021, gives us the impression that our investigation was not so bad in a certain way. So why it's important to do that? It's important for many reasons, but I would say that developing the knowledge and make this knowledge accessible to everyone is really important. When you document Russian intelligence units and military ecosystem, you know who and which unit does what. And it's very important in the information field and disinformation field to know that, because we've seen that there is a lot of time an overlap between the cyber operation and the information operation. We've seen that so many times. If you refer, for example, to the Macron leaks in 2017, which is typically a hack and leak campaign, we've seen that in Charlie Hebdo in France, hack and leak in 2023. So knowing, I'm not saying that, I'm not attributing anything in this case, it's not the purpose of the thing, but we see the overlap between information and cyber operation against European countries. And by documenting this unit, you develop the knowledge of everyone, every people working in this field. It's also very good for addressing accountability, of course, but also to document the European sanctions. And with this kind of report, which is open source, you give the floor to the possibility to obtain European sanctions against units that probably disinform or do some disinformation operation in Europe. It's also a way for us, of course, to inspire new angles and investigation techniques on military units, and give some interest to this kind of technique, above to try to cure my own depression, if you want me to come back to the initial slide. Another question would be how to do it well. Always remember that my mother has access to the same data, and this was very important because, of course, when you publish this kind of report, I would be a liar if I don't tell you that you have to make a sort of risk assessment, because security on this kind of field, you are documenting some intelligence units. It's always crucial to have this discussion before the publication. The idea for this publication was precisely that it was public information. It was a way also to point at these units saying, well, you're doing very good in certain ways, but sometimes you're really messy and you're not that good in certain way. Our advice at CheckFirst would be, as always, and probably all of you do that, but write, of course, your report, but we read your report and also peer review this kind of document. And this is why we've used on these two reports, something that we do systematically at CheckFirst, is to use the OSINT guidelines for methodology and final internal approval. And this is really important. So this document was, of course, reviewed by the author, the analyst that did this investigation, the staff at CheckFirst, but also peer review by third-party people not implicated in the specialists in the field, not implicated or not involved in the initial investigation, to redo the investigation, qualify it, and see if we had done the job at a good way. And I think this is, once again, very important, especially in this field of activity, which is really, really, really sensitive. So what to do next and what comes next? What can you do with this kind of thing? Well, OSINT is sometimes not enough. And of course, what you've seen, we gathered data from internet, we've cross-checked, cross-referenced everything with some typical OSINT pivot and OSINT techniques. But when you publish this kind of report, you also do it for a sort of public interest. And it could also lead to new ideas of investigation. Why can't we compare this kind of geographical website, for example, with other sources like the Strava data? I'm not sure if military unit in Russia uses Strava, but you never know. Let's try to do that. Can we compare this geographical site with other sources like public leaks? Yandex Food, which is a very famous leak. We could do that. It's not in the report. I'm not telling you that we didn't do any investigation on that, but that could be an idea for other people to cross-match the two investigations. We could also probably use private leaks. I give the floor to so many very good investigative analysts that are probably no unknowns, but we also try to inspire in this way and to interest people on working on this field. Okay, CheckFirst. This was nice, but is there a third ongoing investigation? I don't want to spoil anything, but maybe it's time for you to stay tuned, and maybe we have a third part incoming, and I won't say more on that. It's a long investigation that we've been doing on this field, but we would like to issue a new report sometime. So I would say that, yeah, it's probably an ongoing process. And yeah, stay tuned on that. Thank you so much for this presentation. I hope it was interesting. And Nana, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Hervé. You disappointed many people among the Russian audience. So this was really impressive, and this is such an original investigation. And thank you as well, Hervé, for opening up at the beginning of the session, and sharing your reflections on the current challenges of OSINT. It is a probably shared feeling. In any case, despite that, I guess there is hope, because you mentioned more than once that you're still having fun while investigating. You use the word fun many times, so good. So we have now a good amount of time for questions. Just a quick reminder, we are using a Slido for the Q&A. So if you haven't already signed up, you just need to scan the QR code that you see on your screen, or type slido.com and enter the password #thisinfo. So I see that we have a good amount of questions. I'm going to try to organize them by topics. I'll do my best at them.
I can answer meanwhile the first one about the methodology.
Yeah, I think let's go for the methodology first. Yes, could you tell us a bit more about your methodology, specifically how you go from collecting images of insignia to building a reliable hypothesis about unit structure?
This is super interesting. This is something that I often tell during the trainings that we do at CheckFirst. OSINT is not just about collecting things, and it's quite easy to collect insignias, and you've seen so many of them on the pages that I've shown you in the process. The problem is that you need to analyze the data that you collect. So there is a huge work in the background. It seems very simple, of course, when we publish a report or when I do this 30 minutes presentation. But of course, there is a huge process of analyzing in the background. All the insignias are not really relevant. So before we discard sometimes we don't discard certain insignias because they are not relevant for the moment, but we have the intuition, the analyst has got the intuition that insignias is maybe something that would be interesting in the future. But some insignias are really not relevant, so there is nothing on the insignia, so you just discard them. But once again, the analysis of the symbology that is on the medal itself is really important and gives you a very good clue of what you are looking for. Once again, the broken keys, the diamonds, the loudspeakers, the bat, for example. So you do that because, first of all, you have good skills in Russian, and this is quite important when you work on a Russian military unit to have someone in the team that speaks quite fluent Russian. You cannot just spend your time between translation tools, for example. It's possible, but it's more complicated. So if you have somebody or someone in your unit speaking Russian, it's obviously easier to work. So we do that by just analyzes it. And it's very manual. And unfortunately, or fortunately, AI is not going to help us a lot in this situation because it's really human in the background.
And Hervé, the second question, let me highlight it. It's a follow-up question to what you just said. To what extent could Russian intelligence deliberately deceive or manipulate insignia online to mislead you guys doing OSINT? And how do you guard against building analysis on potential deceptive artifacts?
Yeah, that's a possibility, of course. And when you publish this kind of report, in a certain way, you give clues on your methodology. So it's always a balance between exposing and showing your methodology, etc. So we, of course, did this risk assessment. So now you are all aware that this is something definitely possible in the next future. I would say that you can think about the pre-existence of an insignia. So if you see many insignias like this on forums during several years, the probability, the odd that this insignia is fake or forged for this kind of purpose is very low. But I don't know. I won't do any prospective or whatsoever or divination in the background. But I would say that within the next month, for example, we are of course going to examine closely these kind of insignias to try to detect this. If an insignia that pops up suddenly in the forum and for which we don't find any previous existence, I would consider that it would need some specific investigation. Once again, it's not just the insignias. You have to cross-reference it and cross-reference with forums, collectors. We'll see. We are not sure that it's going to happen. It's not likely to happen. But of course, we have to be cautious.
you have to be cautious. And actually, there is another question that was partially answered what you just said, that it says if symbolic systems like medals and badges reveal internal hierarchies, why hasn't Russia moved to standardize, obscure, or abandon them insensitive units? Are we seeing institutional inertia or calculated signaling? Are they playing with us?
No, they are not playing users. And the very good example of that is that if you look at the Gnida's project's post, and thank you, Gnida's project, for that, you see that they've been using this kind of patch for at least 5 years in the background, and they are very proud of them. So it's very linked to the fact that they are proud of the unit and the history of the badge in itself. It's like something very, I wouldn't say ego, but it's pride in a certain way. So you play on that too.
Okay, that makes total sense. Do you see this approach combining valoristics and OSINT being applied to other countries or intelligence services?
I'm not a specialist of the military thing. What I would say from the French perspective, for example, I don't see this. You don't see this kind of insignias and medal produced in European units. But I would say that it's also a way to do some, let's say, not media literacy, but insignia literacy, and to train our intelligence services, saying, well, be aware of what you do with medals, and let's also be cautious on that point. Use this technique also to protect ourselves in a certain way.
Thank you, Hervé. One of the key takeaways is that psychological operations, cyber units, and cryptographic capabilities seem to be brought together under the same structure. So we have this participant asking, what does this tell us about how Russia conceptualized information operations?
Wow, that's a good question. It's complicated to answer that. First of all, the organization in the military sphere are really often moving, and something that is relevant today will probably not be relevant within 5 years. And maybe this report will make the Russian organization change. I don't know. And in that case, it would be an impact for our investigation, because every move in an organization is costly and impose a cost to this structure. So it's very interesting. What does it tell us about Russia? Well, in a certain way, they've integrated many things: the cryptography, the psychological operations, cyber unit, etc. And basically, it is what you see in the internet thing. You see that on social network. You see that in the information operation that we document every week or every day for certain unit. So it's like the kind of reflection of the reality of the organization, this capacity of having integrated all this possibility in the same unit or the same chain of commandment. But I would not bet too much on the real structural intelligence that is in the background, once again, because it's a very movable area, organization changes, etc. But it tells a story, and that's also why we publish this kind of report.
I am very interested in a question that just arrived, because you mentioned your mother, and probably mine is here around too. So let's land this investigation. So how do you translate this kind of very technical investigations into something that can be understood and used by a broader audience, always within the field, I guess?
Yeah, that's also a super good question, because when you publish this kind of thing, what is the audience that you try to target? So maybe if you target certain type of audience, you would display these medals with that children could colorize, for example, with pencils, etc. So it depends. We try to make it funny by mixing different things: the geographical approach, the satellite view, for example, the drawings, the symbology on the medals, to also address the historical part of it, because all these medals are deeply deeply linked to the once again the Soviet and the Russian organization, the Russian way of doing it. So we try to be as pedagogical as possible, but of course the phaleristic is kind of niche. We try to make it less niche just by doing this, but I know that this is typically niche.
Thank you, Hervé. Okay, this is a broad question, so feel free to explain as much as you can. What are
the blind spot?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, of course, there are plenty of blind spots. The first one is that we are not inside a unit, so you can geolocate, for example, a base or a compound of a unit, but you don't know what is really inside. Sometimes we've documented, for example, an address, but just by going on the forum, we knew that this compound was not really the good place where they stay. They usually spend some more time 50 kilometers away in the forest, in another base, for example. So you never know. You just expose some failure, some obsec. You just expose geographical position. But of course, the main, let's say, blind spot in this investigation is that we targeted from the beginning a specific unit. We wanted to document the 16th century, for example, and not something else. So maybe there are more interesting units. This is the angle that we choose at the beginning, just like journalists or documentalists. So there are plenty of blind spots. And what we don't see, for example, we don't see, by doing this, you don't look at military operation. You don't see this kind of unit, for example, deployed abroad or deployed on a combat field in an easy way. So it's just a part of the puzzle. It's a very interesting one. But of course, this is more or less what I said, what to do with this kind of investigation. You can use this as a base for your investigation and try to have another angle by mixing with other data sets or mixing with other geographical area.
Thank you, Hervé. I'm gonna go for this one. During the Second World War, US, as a part of the Fortitude Plan, have created a phantom unit. Not less than 19 divisions have been created and fabric badges that have been produced for this purpose. Have you considered any possibility of such deception operation? I guess that, did you consider the possibility of that some of the decorations you analyze could be part of a deception operation? I guess that's
Of course, and yeah, of course, and this is something that we had in mind. There is one example for the medal, for example, that was found, not attributed to an individual, but there was already the mention of a commander of the unit. So once again, you don't take these medals as the big clue in itself. You cross-reference, and just by going to, once again, this forum, etc., it would be quite difficult. I'm not saying that it's impossible. I'm saying that it would be quite difficult to create a global whole story dating from years and years and years on forum, etc. We've spent hours on very old forums, very old school forums, where people exchange their own past and their own experience as a former military serviceman, etc., etc. So there is a story in the background. So I'm not saying it's not impossible, and it's maybe you're right. Maybe it's part of a Fortitude plan, but once again, now you can cross-reference this with satellite imagery. You can cross-reference that with forums and many other things in the background. So it's kind of difficult, but yeah, maybe.
I can imagine. Hervé, let me go to this one. Did your findings change or reinforce existing public attributions of certain group units and their activities? Did you have the time to double check that?
We received some feedbacks on. I will not detail everything that we received from the background, but we received some feedback. Well, first of all, on public feedback, as I mentioned, the GNIDA project, for example, shown this kind of patch on commanders dated 2021. So it was very interesting also to saw that and to compare this. So it was very good. We've received some feedback, let's say, from contacts that we have in the field that say that, yeah, some of the units that we had targeted were not that much documented. We knew that for most of them they existed, but we didn't know where they could think. So I would not oversell the report, but many of the information that are in the report are pretty much exclusive, or at least new information. Not everything, of course, but there are some new information.
And do you think this kind of research makes it harder for these units to operate, or they just simply adapt?
I'd like to tell you, sure, of course, we have a super impact, and I would be super proud to do that. I'm much more pragmatic. As we see in the information operation, the Russian information manipulation set, for example, they don't care when they are exposed. It's like badge of honor, or it's not their point. So I would say that it's not very crucial, but once again, I'm not a military specialist. I don't work for the intelligence services. I don't know what they do with this kind of report. Maybe it doesn't mean anything for them or to them. I don't know. I hope, but I don't know.
Maybe we'll see on time.
If you find me dead within 2 weeks, I would tell you that maybe it had an impact, because they felt very pissed about these reports.
Yeah, I like this one as well. Based on your findings, Hervé, how coordinated do these different units appear to be in practice? Do you see real integration between cyber and influence operations?
Yes, I already mentioned that when you talk about, when we see insignias, for example, with geos, emblemas, plus a loudspeaker or whatsoever, you see this kind of coordination, or at least integration. Once again, it's very often temporary. You never know what's going to happen within 2 weeks. Units get dissolved, they are changed, etc., etc. What we see and what we can illustrate in a certain way, and I hope this is not a bias of analysis, is really the overlap thing between the cyber operation and the disinformation operation that we see in many operations, not all of them. Well, you can illustrate this overlap by analyzing this. Coordination. It's always complicated. Also, there is so many ego problem in this kind of unit at the level of high-ranking people that, of course, on paper they are always coordinated. In reality, it's a war of services internally. They would do things that the other one would never know, the other unit would never know. So once again, it's a bit more complex than this.
Thank you, Hervé. The next question has been already answered. Yeah, this one. What should European actors take away from this? What are we currently missing in how we approach this kind of threat?
You mean by threat the risk of being exposed by my own patch? Yeah, that's a good. I think that's a good lesson, and that's one of the things. But once again, I don't see the military unit, European military unit, doing such a thing. If you think about the French example, usually the medals are very small. The medals are not very figurative. It's color symbols, but complicated to read. I would say that it's also a good lesson for, in every military unit, there is a sort of what we call in French amical, or, the group of old members of things that always try to create something apart from the official military thing, like the 50th anniversary of the old military, blah, 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 blah. So I'm more afraid of the non-official patches that are made by collectors, by PI or private soldiers, for example, or private military things. They would probably do it for a goodwill or good purpose, but they would probably make the mistake to disclose too many things, but not on the official part of the symbology used in the European Union.
And I think we can go for the last one. I think that you somehow replied to that to this, but maybe let's land it to a country. Do you think this methodology combining valoristics and OSINT could be applied to other countries, for example, to better understand intelligence structures in contexts like China?
I'm not a specialist in China. I would recommend to read the excellent work doing by a French researcher, Paul Charon, and Jean-Baptiste Jean-Jean Villemer on OSINT and the China ecosystem. They did a very fantastic work, a huge book, 600 pages, which is sort of Bible on that. So yes, it's possible to do this kind of thing, but once again, the Russian military have a long story of doing this kind of medals, and with very figurative representation on them, which are easier to work. It's probably possible to do exactly the same maybe on North Korea, for example. All the people that delivers medals at a huge level, it's probably possible if it's documented. The thing is that we didn't explore this supply chain, and I want to come back to this notion. We didn't explore the supply chain of China, for example. Maybe there is this kind of supply chain. I would say that it could be worth to do the investigation. I don't know. I mean, the floor is yours. You have the methodology, use it, and please publish reports. That's very important.
We need to keep publishing evidence. Indeed. Thank you, Hervé. We are running out of time. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, CheckFirst. Before we close, just a quick reminder of our upcoming webinars on 30 April. Look what you made me do, how film actors weaponize pop culture. Can you hear me? Yeah, I think so. All right, yes. Then on the 28th of May, we have David versus Goliath in the DSA era, lessons from Bits of Freedom Victory. Yay. And then on the 4th of June, enforce on the DSA enforcers, how can member states legally push the commission to act? So we hope to see you all there. And finally, before we leave, please, we kindly ask you to take a moment to fill a survey, a short one that will appear just when you close the session. Because it really helps us to understand how you value these kind of webinars. Also, you have an option to share the topics of interest to future sessions. Hervé, please.
Yes, and if you want to contact us, don't forget the email address, which is info@checkfirst.network. I just wanted to mention that. It's not on my slide, but if you want, we can give help on this kind of investigation. Sorry.
Thank you, Hervé. No problem at all. Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely rest of the day, and bye-bye.